Welcome to Knowledge Staff. Today's presentation is brought to you by Ross Squire, the President of Knowledge Staff. Knowledge Staff is a leading staffing and consulting agency that deals with many industries including learning and development. Today's webinar is Resumes That Produce Results. We'll be talking about what you need to know, what the importance of the relevance of your resume, how you can create a resume that produces interviews. There's so much great information today. So thank you for staying tuned to Knowledge Staff.
Okay, so the first thing is I included this quote because I thought it was very telling. The aim of marketing is to know and understand the customer so well that the product or service fits him and sells itself. And I thought this was really important because what the resume is a marketing document that's selling yourself. So in the case of this quote, the customer is the client or the prospective employer, and the product or service is yourself. And the only way to really understand what the customer or the client is looking for is to be able to project a little bit in terms of what their requirements are, and then to figure out what it is about yourself that would be marketable to that prospective client. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to cover a few things. The first thing is to give a little bit of a perspective on recruiters. It's important to have a perspective of what their concerns are, what they're looking for, what their drivers are, so that your resume feeds into that. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of relevance, and then we'll actually show you some techniques that we use that produce interviews. And again, the only thing that the resume is good for is to produce that interview. I want to take a second just to say what this webinar is not about. The first thing is we're really not going to be getting into graphic design. We're not going to be getting into overall layouts of resumes. There are hundreds and hundreds of sources that are available. It goes without saying that the resume needs to be visually pleasing. It goes without saying that there needs to be no typos. It goes without saying that there needs to be consistency throughout the resume. So we're really not going to touch on that, and you can find lots of sources all over the internet that can provide some guidance in that arena. The second thing that I really need to say up front is that the only way that these techniques work is if you're actually on target for the job. There is nothing that I can impart to you that's going to have you get an interview for a job that you're not qualified for. And it's not uncommon that I work with people and they tell me, I have really bad luck when it comes to sending out all these resumes and I never hear back. And then I ask them to send me the resume that they sent and the job description, and there's just no alignment. So these techniques work when you are on target and appropriate for a job. And what I would really have you do is to look at the job description and reflect for a second. Is this a job that you would hire yourself for? Are you qualified? Is it a stretch? If it's a stretch, I don't say not to send the resume, but I would not have the same weighting on those resumes as resumes where you look at a job description and it's a job that you're right on for. So it's those instances that these techniques will really work. Jobs where you're absolutely qualified, where there's no question about it, and it's just a matter of telling the correct story. So that's really what we'll be talking about today. So let me start with a really quick poll. If you were to take a look at the number of resumes that you're currently using, would it be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 10, or more than 10? So if you could just take a couple of seconds and just enter into the chat window the number of versions of resumes that you're currently using. And I'll give you about 10 seconds to do that.
Oh, great. We have great answers. Wow. Okay. So how many different versions of your resume are you using? So the majority of people are saying that they have 3 resumes?
Okay, very good. You will see during the course of the webinar that that is not the answer that we would view as being correct. So just to cut to the chase, using the strategies that we're going to talk about today, you're going to wind up using 10 or more resumes, and we'll go over a little bit about why that is and how that all gets done. Alrighty, so let's talk a little bit about recruiters. They are the gatekeeper. In most cases, when you submit a resume, it's not going directly to the hiring manager, and it's going to a staffing person within that corporation. And what's important to know about the recruiters is that just based on a pure numbers basis, they're probably not going to be able to help you. When they post a job online or they work on a job that they have to fill, they're often getting hundreds of responses. We ran a LinkedIn job posting just this week, and I have 185 responses. And the truth of the matter is that I have 10 openings to fill. So 175 people, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to help in terms of actually getting the job. So it's important to know that, it's a numbers game, and in many cases, they're not going to be able to help. The second is that they are extremely busy. So when it comes to getting their attention, you've got about 10 to 15 seconds. So for anyone that's in the business of staffing, that's skilled at looking at resumes, you make your initial assessment within 10 seconds. I probably make my initial assessment within 5. I can look at a resume within 5 seconds and know whether I want to continue reading. Now, it doesn't mean that my assessment is correct, but it means that that's the assessment that's being provoked from the resume that I'm reading. So that's basically all that you get. Remember, I've got 185 people that have responded. I don't have the time or the energy to read line by line through the entire stack of 185 resumes. So I'm making these initial snap judgments that either has me put the resume to the side or continue reading. The next thing that's important is that you can't assume that the people that are doing the first line screening are competent or fully competent in the world of learning and development. Most recruiters are not specialized in one specific area. They're working on jobs in L&D, they're working for marketing jobs, they're looking at IT jobs, they're looking at all different kinds of jobs. So you cannot assume that the person that's reviewing the resume is going to be fully competent to read between the lines. Do they know that e-learning is the same as web-based training, is the same as computer-based training? Do they know that e-learning can be spelled with a hyphen and without a hyphen? You can't assume that they're going to know these things. And you have to make sure that the resume presents the information that they're looking for. The next thing is that in almost every case, the resumes that you submit online are going into repositories or applicant tracking systems. And these are huge systems that store thousands and thousands of resumes. And then the recruiters are using these repositories to do keyword searches. And what they're using as the basis for their keyword searches is the job description that the hiring manager has given them. So if they're looking for an instructional designer, they're looking for an instructional designer. They're probably not going to put in the words instructional technologist or learning designer or learning specialist or training specialist. Now they may, but I can guarantee they absolutely will put in the search criteria instructional designer. So if your resume doesn't contain the words that are contained in the job description, you most likely will not get the call to be interviewed. And then lastly, we've got this issue of cover letters. If a job description asks for the cover letter, you absolutely should prepare a cover letter. But most cover letters are not put into the part of a repository that's searchable. So the old conventional wisdom was that you had a resume, and then what you did is you wrote a cover letter that would address all the things that really weren't included in the resume that people needed to know about. It doesn't work. And what I can tell you honestly is I have not read a cover letter in probably 10 or 12 years. I just don't remember reading cover letters. I don't read cover letters. I don't have the time to read cover letters. And for many of the people that I talk to in the business, they don't read them either. So the whole idea that you can just have one or two resumes and then customize yourself based on the cover letter is not a strategy that's overly viable. So again, if the job description calls for it, I would certainly write the cover letter and make sure that the cover letter addresses what's being stressed in the job description, but you cannot rely on that as a basis for getting the interview. So the other thing that's really important to recognize is what are the concerns that the recruiters have. And the first is that what they're trying to gauge very, very fast is, does this candidate or consultant have the appropriate skills and experience? So they're keyed in. This is what I'm looking for. Does this candidate have the experience to do the job? They're also trying to make a judgment about whether the person is qualified or overqualified. And this is when you get into the situation where someone's been a manager for 20 years and they apply for a job that is more of a senior individual contributor, and there's somebody making an assessment about whether that person is overqualified. And unfortunately, that's their assessment that you have to kind of feed into. The next thing that they're concerned about is, can I afford this person? So if the person appears to be too senior, it may raise concerns about whether you can afford the person, about whether you can retain the person. And then they're also concerned about how quickly they're going to be able to fill the job. So most corporate recruiters and even recruiters on the staffing side, they're gauged based on how fast that they actually fill jobs. And then the final criteria that they're measured on is retention. So is the placement going to stick? If they wind up referring somebody, the person gets hired and the person lasts for a month, that's not a successful placement, and it's kind of a ding in terms of their performance metrics. So these are all the things that you're kind of feeding into when it comes to dealing with recruiters. So let me go to the next topic, and that is the whole issue of relevance. And it's a word that I use an awful lot. And the reason that I use it is because it's so important. Clients, prospective employers care about what their challenges are, what their concerns are, what their breakdowns, and they look for people that can support them in either meeting those challenges or resolving the breakdowns. And the only way to really get an insight into what the concerns are of the client is to look at the job description. They hold the key. So what we do, and what we recommend that everyone do, is to really dissect the job description, and we'll do that in a little while. Dissect it to try and gauge what are the hot buttons, what are the key areas that this client is looking for, what are the things that I need to pull out of my background and make sure that I stress on my resume so that there's no question that I am relevant for this job. And then you also want to be able to utilize your resume in a way that uses the best use of the real estate. So if you think of the resume as a piece of real estate, you want to make sure that the resume contains as much information that's relevant to the client as possible. You don't want the real estate to be filled up with things that have no interest or no relevance to the client. So if I'm looking at my resume and I'm looking at a job order, I want to make sure that all the relevant experience that I have in all the jobs that I have for this particular client shows up on the resume. And if it means that the section about my personal interests has to go, that's less interesting. If it means that I have to de-emphasize certain parts of my experience to make myself more marketable, I'll de-emphasize those areas. So the whole idea is to make sure that what you present is the best presentation of your background as it pertains to what that prospective client or what that prospective employer is looking for. So let me stop real fast and just ask, are there any questions about that, the whole issue of relevance?
So we do have a couple of questions, Ross. We have some going back to the cover letter. Do you want me to ask those now, or do you want me to wait?
We can ask one. Sure.
Okay, so here's one about the cover letter. It says that if a cover letter isn't specifically requested, should you just submit the resume alone?
So this is a case where it's an online submission and they're not asking for for a cover letter straightforward as required.
Correct.
I would spend my time utilizing the technique that we're going to talk about, and that is customizing the resume. That's where I would put my time.
Okay, so someone said, but for some people, wouldn't they consider it missing or consider that a missing element? So what happens if you can't predict whether a recruiter assumes that you're going to bring or send a resume, a cover letter or not with your resume?
I mean, you certainly can. I think that the important concept here is to not rely on the cover letter as being overly impactful in terms of getting the interview. It may be read, it may not be read. I guarantee the resume will be read. So a cover letter that's accompanied by a resume that doesn't tell the right story, I think is a lost opportunity. So I'm not saying to not invest the time in developing a cover letter. I'm just saying that you can't rely on it. So I hope that makes sense. So here are some concepts that we think are incredibly important for generating the interviews. And the claim that I can make is based on the fact that these are strategies that for my company, we are able to set up interviews in about 85% of the cases where we submit a resume. So 85% of the times that we send out a resume, we generate the interview. And part of that is based on the fact that we are specializing in learning and development. We know how to ask the right questions about what clients are looking for. We submit the right candidates, but it's also that we tell the right story. So the first thing is, and this is the biggest pointer of all, is that we recommend customizing every single resume where the job description is known. There is no action that you can take that will produce more positive results in terms of getting interviews and getting responsive from prospective clients than to make sure that every single resume gets customized for that particular client. And in some cases, this can be a time-consuming process, and in others, it's not. But there's just no way around the fact that by customizing your resume, your hit rate in terms of hearing back and generating interviews will absolutely go up. And once we started doing this, our hit rate went up fourfold. So I'm basing this on absolute experience. I'm also basing it as a person that has hired a large number of people, and people have told me that they have actually done it. So that's the most important thing. So the keys to customizing your resume is to answer the two following questions. The first one is, after reviewing the job description, what relevant experience do I have for this job? And then as you look over the job description and you figure out where you've done that kind of work before or where you've done something very similar, you just start adding bullets to your resume. The second question is my resume properly weighted? In other words, does it stress the skills and experience that's being stressed in the job description? So what I mean by that is, if I look at a job description and the job description is talking all about develop this, write this, perform this, facilitate this, and doesn't really talk about management, I want to make sure that my resume stresses the contributor activities that I do and doesn't stress the management activities. And the reason for that is that's not what they're asking for. Now, it could be that it wasn't included in the job description, but all that we have to go on as an insight into the client's or the prospective employer's needs is the job description. So I want to make sure that the resume is properly weighted. And again, it all comes from taking a look at the job descriptions and making certain assumptions based on that. So here's how you go about customizing the resume. The first thing that you do is make sure that your objective aligns with the job description. So I think that I mentioned that we recently ran an ad on LinkedIn for people that could help us with the administration of WebEx training. Of 185 resumes that I reviewed, and I think I only went through about 100 so far, there were about 15 that were on target that stressed the fact that they had the WebEx. So for all the other people that I looked at, I sent a note back saying, thank you very much. You've got an impressive background, but this job and assignment really calls for people that have solid experience with WebEx and administering WebEx training sessions. If you have this experience, please get back to me. I would say that 3/4 of the people that got back to me had WebEx experience. Now, if I didn't take that step, which most recruiters won't do, of reaching out to say, hey, is this really who you are? Then 65 of the people that I thought were dead would have been dead. So it just goes to show that you have to put the information on the resume or else it just gets bypassed. So you want to make sure that the objective aligns with the job description. If they're asking for an instructional designer, that's the job that you're looking for. If they're looking for an e-learning designer and developer, and that's who you are, that's what the objective must say. The next thing that we think is absolutely critical is making sure that right at the top of the resume, you have a very strong summary section. And the summary section should contain 4 or 5 bullets that basically mimics the job description and says, this is who I am, these are the skills that I have, and there's no question that you need to continue reading the resume. And the reason that the summary section is so important is that it solves the 10-second rule. If somebody reads the first 3 or 4 bullets and the bullets all make sense in terms of what they're looking for, they're going to keep going. If the first things that they see are things that are of no interest to them, they're probably going to put it to the side. So the summary section is extremely important, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. The next thing is to make sure that the bulleted lists appear in the order of importance for the job description. So I was talking about the weighting of the resume, and the way that you present information goes a long way towards how it's interpreted. So most people intuitively look at a bulleted list and consider the first bullet to be what you're doing now, or what you do most of, or what you do most or best. And the last bullet is what you did when you first started, or what you do a little of. So just by changing the order of how something is presented on the resume, will change the emphasis and will change the assessments that it produces. So if I'm looking for an instructional designer and the first 3 bullets that I see are about management, it leaves certain assessments. If the first 3 bullets are directly related to instructional design and development, it feeds the assessments that I want. It'll produce a positive assessment versus raising a potential yellow or red flag. And then the last thing is to make sure that you use the same words and spelling contained in the job description. And this could be something as simple as making sure that you're using the same punctuation. I've seen some instances where if somebody puts the word e-learning in a search criteria without the hyphen between the e and the learning, then it doesn't come up. So if you see something where it's phrased a certain way, you want to make sure that you mimic it so that when that recruiter is using those keywords, that the resume comes up in their keyword search results list. So let me stop real quick and just see if there's any questions about these techniques, these methods, the whole idea around customizing resumes. So let me give you 5 or 10 seconds to put something into the chat window.
So once again, Ross, I want you to really emphasize again, because I'm seeing some of the statements and some of the questions that, that you understand that there are recruiters who have different sort of perspectives, and that whether some may want objectives, some may not want objectives, some may want it designed a certain way, but that really what you're saying is that there are certain tips and tricks that you can really use to get the attention of those staffing agents or those recruiters. So there are people who say that, well, wait a minute, but some people want the cover letters and some people, I just don't want people to get caught up that because we understand that everybody has different ways of doing or advising people on how to to build a resume. But really what you're stressing is that there are certain tips and tricks that people need to know.
Yeah, and you weren't on the call, but I actually said that, I mentioned the fact that these are the perspectives that we offer. There are some people that say education could go first, summary section, skill summary, whatever. The tips that we're trying to that we're offering, or that I'm offering, are in regards to what we see are the realities in terms of how resumes are dealt with. So if you only have 10 seconds, then how do you grab the attention of somebody within the first 10 seconds? Now, if the person is really stressing, formal orientation and instructional design and adult learning theory, and that becomes something that becomes really important, maybe I move the education section up if it's relevant. If I have a master's degree in instructional technology, maybe that's something that I don't hide towards the end of the resume. It's something that I stress. So, yeah, I absolutely agree that there are many different approaches, and the tips and techniques that we're offering are ones based on the realities that we see in how resumes are dealt with, and in how recruiters work, and in what generates interviews.
And we do have a
So were there
question.
any other questions just about the whole issue of customizing and how to do it? And
Yes, we said so. There was someone who says, just to clarify, did you mean the bulleted list should be in order of their required skills versus those skills that are your strongest, as listed in the job description?
so the bulleted list should be in the order of importance that's being demonstrated or described in the job description. That's the issue. So in other words, they're giving you their wish list, and your job is to say, here's your wish list, and here's what I have. Here's how I answer your wish list, and it needs to be in the same order of importance. You're not necessarily saying that this is the order of expertise. So in other words, you're not saying that because it's listed first, that's what you're best at. You're just presenting. It's a marketing document, and you're presenting the experience that you have that is most relevant to them in the order of importance that they're showing. And what we're going to do with the next slide is we're just going to take a look at a sample job description. So this is a job that I pulled off of the internet. Let me give you, a few seconds to just review the job description. What I have done is I've taken the liberty to take a look at the job description and to underline the things that I thought were being stressed in the job description. So I want you to take a couple of seconds just to skim through it. What's clear is that they're looking for an instructional designer. It's clear that the person's going to have full project lifecycle responsibility of designing and developing and testing e-learning. They're looking for someone that's going to develop something that's engaging and innovative. The work is going to be developed in Captivate, so we know that that's a key point. Working with subject matter experts, working with content and existing source materials. The person's going to get involved in different tools and technologies, so it looks like they don't have a separate department that does media, because they're asking for experience with graphics and animation. This particular company was a company that was involved in the accounting world, so they were looking for people that might have some experience in the audit and tax world, people that had firm grounding in instructional design. And then if we looked at the qualifications, they're looking for people ideally with a master's degree in instructional design. Who doesn't want that? 5 years of relevant work experience. Again, the Adobe experience with learning management systems, some experience with accounting and finance. So it's a pretty standard job description. So let me go from here to take a look at just a sample resume. And this is a typical resume that we would see. And if anybody is a Netflix Ozark fan, you will get the use of Marty Bird as my person there.
Love that show.
But this is a standard instructional designer resume. Basically, here's their experience: great master's degree in history, done some work for hospitals and utilities, and AT&T, has designed, developed. And if we go down and look at their software, we can see that they've got some of the tools and technologies that we're looking for. So, if I were to look at this person, I would say that this person is probably qualified for the job. So would the person be called in for the interview? Possibly. But let's take a look at what we can do to make this a much more impactful resume. So I talked a little bit about the summary section. And what I would recommend is to include a summary section at the beginning that would include bullets that were similar to this. Experienced instructional designer with extensive experience in the design and development of engaging blended learning solutions, including SCORM-compliant e-learning modules, instructor-led courses, and webinars. So if we went back to the job description, we just basically hit on most of what they're looking for. Formal grounding in instructional design methodologies and adult learning theory. Again, I'm framing that I bring that to the party. Excellent ability to collaborate effectively with business stakeholders and subject matter experts and leverage existing source materials. Again, we're feeding them back, and this is what we've done in our background. It wasn't reflected on the resume, but it now is. Extensive experience with a variety of e-learning tools and technologies, including authoring tools, audio and video editing, blah, 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 and then I name some of the products. Again, I'm feeding them the information. I'm telling them I am who you're looking for. Broad experience supporting financial, healthcare, safety, and compliance applications. So I'm hitting on the fact that they were looking for financial applications. And then finally, strong project management skills with the ability to successfully oversee multiple projects and meet time and quality standards. Now, this is a long summary section. I might not include all of these, but I think you can get a gist from looking at this summary section that I've now framed the conversation in terms of how my resume is viewed. And that's the whole idea. There is no doubt in my mind that if a recruiter looked at this summary section, they would continue. I would get past the 10-second rule. So let me ask a question. Any comments, any observations that you see, anything about the summary section that you don't think is effective? So let me give you a couple of seconds just to kind of take a look at that and see if there's any questions that you might have. Okay, so Evelyn commented the first bullet is really powerful and summarized the job description. Jennifer, great question. How many pages is an acceptable resume? So that is a great question. So we were going to touch on that in the next slide, but we can touch on it now. So I am of the opinion that resumes should really be no longer than 2 pages. There are some consulting resumes that I've seen that could be a lot of pages, and I think that can be okay for consulting. But I think that you want to try and get your information on 2 pages. But again, it should be justified. If you are early on in your career, you've got a couple of years of experience, there's no reason for two pages. But if you've got 5, 6, 7 years of experience, as long as the real estate is being filled with information that's relevant for the job, I think it's fine to actually have a 2-page resume. So let's go on to the next slide, where I show a little bit about how I changed this person's resume. So the first thing that I did was I took the education off of the beginning, because even though it was an impressive master's degree, it was in history. And I don't know that is such a large benefit that it deserves the most prime real estate on the resume, which is the beginning. So that was the first thing. The second thing that we did is we actually put the objective of instructional designer. Absolutely matches the job description. So we're saying this is the job that I'm looking for. This is who I am. The next thing that I did is we pulled the software section up towards the beginning of the resume. And the reason that I did that was because technology seemed to be a really important component of the job. And I didn't want to wait until the end to show that experience. So I basically included a lot of the software, both graphics, video, audio, e-learning authoring tools that I thought that they would be interested in seeing. And again, we're getting past that 10, 15-second rule. There's no doubt that after reading the summary, after reading the software, that they're going to want to continue reading. The next thing that I did is I took a look at the bullets that were on the resume and I reordered them. I made sure that the project management bullet went from being the first bullet to being the last bullet, because I didn't want to stress and come across as being a project manager. Even though they talked a little bit about leading projects, it really was not something that was overly stressed. So I wanted to de-emphasize that, but still show that I had that experience. The next thing that I did that I thought was important was, on the original resume, the person indicated they had developed a scenario exercise for something called FinPlan. Well, it turned out that FinPlan was that company's payroll and accounting application. There's no way that the person reviewing the resume would have seen that. So I wanted to call that out. And that's something that I actually caution, is that if you're going to use acronyms, you have to make sure that they're widely known. And if not, you actually have to spell it out in terms of what they are, or talk about them in generic terms. So I think that that's really important that you do. And then I just made sure that in every case that I could expand a little bit more to feed in more to what the job description was calling for, that I did that. So the resume went from being a one-page resume to a two-page resume. Part of that was because I increased the size of the font from 10 to 12 point. So it made it take up more real estate. Had I left it at 10, there would have been very little information on the second page. It wouldn't have looked good format-wise. So I increased the font size. But this person's been in business since 2012. 8 years of experience certainly merits having a two-page resume. So that's pretty much what we did. And I can show you real quickly a quick side-by-side of the original resume and the revised resume that we did. Now, if I saw in the job description that they were stressing project management, I would have moved the project management bullet from the last bullet of the summary section to the first. Why? Because that's what they're asking for. And that's how you can play around with bulleted lists to change the focus and the emphasis of the resume. Typically, we've used Arial, we used Calibri, something that's clean, easy to read. We typically shy away from Times New Roman because I don't know, maybe it's just my personal preference. I just don't think it's as easy and clean to read. Let me just see if there's any other. Nick asked about the objective section. You certainly could include an objective section. We typically put the title and leave that as kind of the objective for what it is that we're looking to looking for in terms of what the job is. So that's what we do there. Let me see if there are any other questions. And I don't see any others. Okay, so for software, what if you're familiar with it but haven't used it extensively? Great, Evelyn, great question. So we've seen that dealt with different ways. What I would recommend is there's nothing wrong with saying extensive experience with, exposure to, and having that as two separate lists under the software section. And we think that that is a good way of presenting it. So Cesar, it looks like I am the only person that cannot hear you. So I don't know why, but I am sorry. So we'll try and keep going without it. Next question is, what size font is best? I would say nothing larger than 12 point, nothing smaller than 10. And I would base the font size in terms of how it's going to look visually on the resume and how much real estate you have to fill up. That's often what we do. If we see that by having a 12-point font is going to cause a weird page break, we'll change the font size. And that's how we kind of work with that. But we don't go less than 10 point and we don't go more than 12. Next question was, can we use a table at the top with the keywords? I've seen people do that. That can be effective. I've seen people do that where they put all the keywords and then what they'll do is they'll have the font be in invisible or white so it's not seen on the page. That can be okay. It looks kind of weird when you're doing a keyword search to have it show up as a highlighted thing and then you can't see what the word is. But that's certainly a strategy that we've seen that can be effective. And then someone asked, what would the format be for somebody with no experience? I think probably something similar. So if you're an entry-level person looking for a job, again, I go back to my initial comment that you really have to have the skills and experience to be appropriate for the job, to have it make sense. So the idea with somebody that is an entry-level person is to create the story that has somebody want to give you a chance, wants to give you that break. So ideally, it would be if you're going for an instructional design job, it could be your degree, it could be courses that you've taken around learning and development or instructional design. It could list internships that you've worked with that are relevant to the job that you're going for. It could be a list of software tools and technologies, but ultimately would still have a strong summary section that would make the case and present the story about why somebody should continue reading and why they should call you in for an interview. And Nick, you asks also, so what if I have most of its education? Should I put that before work and experience? And I think so. If that is going to be the key selling points and what's most relevant to the prospective employer, then I probably would list all of that education stuff up front. Very good. So thank you for those questions. So what's important to note is that this is going to take time. It's going to take you 35 minutes to customize the first resume. The second resume is going to take 35 minutes. The third is going to take 30. The next one's going to take 25 minutes. But if you're smart, the time that it takes to customize your resume is going to become less and less. What you want to do is you want to create a detailed resume directory where if you're smart, you're going to name the files in something that's descriptive. You know, Pfizer, instructional design opening, Citibank, e-learning design and development resume. And that way, what you'll wind up doing over time is you'll look at a job description. You'll say, you know what, that one's similar to the Pfizer job that I responded to. Let me start with that one and just tweak that one a little bit. Or it'll be part of this resume and part of that resume. The exercise becomes one of being a cut and paste. And the quick tip is that it might make sense to just spend time to do a brain dump. And you don't have to do it all at once. What you can do is take the time, look at one job, and just create bullet items for everything that you did. All the things that you can think that you did over the time that you worked there, just blow it out. Let your resume be 5 pages, 6 pages, 7 pages. Let it just have all of the information that you can think of that you did in all of your jobs, which can make the whole process of customizing the resume much easier going down the road. So these are some of the things that we recommend. So really to summarize, again, the purpose of the resume is to generate the interview. That is the most important thing. The insights and the methods for being able to do that will come from the job description. And you have very little time, 10 seconds, 15 seconds tops, to get their attention and to have them continue to read. Customizing is the key. Building a resume that's relevant to what the companies are looking for is the absolute key. And the assertion that I'm making is that if you employ these techniques, that they will work and you will reap the rewards by being called in for more interviews and hopefully landing more jobs and opportunities. So with that said, let me open it up to any questions that you have. I want to let you all know that we're going to post copies of the presentation. We recorded it. It'll be on our YouTube page. I'll be sending you a copy of the presentation. Any questions that we don't get to for whatever reason, we'll include that in the email that we send out. And 2 other bits of just housekeeping. The next webinar that we're going to be doing is going to be 2 weeks from today, Tuesday, May 12th, again at 12:15. The topic is So You Want to Be a Consultant? And it's really presenting things that you really need to understand and know about consulting lifestyle before you take that plunge. It's a great lifestyle for many people, but for some, it could be an absolute horror show. So that will be what we're talking about. And then I also want to let you know that our first podcast is now visible, is now listenable on SoundCloud under the name Pulse on Learning. So we're going to be doing that every 2 weeks as well. How do you keep track of each resume? Do you suggest some kind of coding naming convention? Yeah. So Jennifer, I would just have, and again, I would have the file name that I'm including in my resume directory be different than the file name that I'm sending out to the company. So I think that's important. That one should just have your name and maybe the name of the company. But you can be as descriptive as you want in the file name so that it helps you to pull that resume back if you need it. Frank recommended maybe putting them into different folders, so that could be really effective. Maybe having one that's more focused on management, one that's more focused on instructional design, one that maybe is more focused on e-learning development. That could be real helpful. Let's see if there's any other questions real fast. Nick asked, should you include soft skills like teamwork that are often not included in a job description? That's a really good question. I actually do I've done other presentations on this, but the job description talks about a lot of the skills, but it doesn't really talk about what people hire. What people hire are people that are dependable, committed, hardworking, trustworthy. That's what people hire. And if your resume has enough real estate to include some of those attributes, then I think that it's something that's worth including. But not if it's going to eliminate other things that are relevant given the job description. And there's a question, most jobs in the consulting industry ask for degrees in computer science, nursing, or business. I have a degree in biology. How do I market myself to fit what they're looking for? Yeah, I don't know. My experience within the learning and development field is that there's not as much emphasis placed on the specific degree. It could be that you're in a consulting field that's a little bit more specialized. Again, maybe the summary section helps get around it. So you show, hey, even though I don't have that degree, let me show you what I have. So that the first thing that they're seeing is not the fact that you don't have that degree. That might be one way to approach that. And you asked for the information with the slides. So let me pull that back. There's the contact info. There you go. So let me give another 5 or 10 seconds for any additional questions, and if not, we'll wrap up. But I want to thank everybody for spending time. I hope that you all stay safe, that we get through this whole COVID thing. It looks like we're starting to turn the corner, which is a good thing, and we're actually seeing more business occurring. So hopefully that's a good sign as well. So I don't see any additional questions. So thank you again. Thank you, Cesara. We will all see you soon, and hopefully next 2 weeks from today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Russ. Thanks, Cesara.